All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Before the afternoon slump really hits in, let's deep dive into talent wars and how Canada can win a changing global landscape. Before we begin, I would love to thank our incredible lineup of panelists who are going to be joining us and sharing insights this afternoon. Now, without further ado, let's kick it off. So, Dr. Georgette, based on the background and the current role that you currently have as Chief of Staff at Mind, with the US doing many things apart from the tariffs and whatnot, they are also rolling back DEI initiatives. Now, how are you rethinking the talent strategies from a global emerging talent pool? And what are the key areas that startups should be looking to attract diverse talent?
Yeah, so I'm going to say that I feel my immediate observation is a lot of companies are rolling back their DEI strategies, their budgets, and so forth. So in my humble opinion, what I feel about that is they were not actually, it's not something that they made as a commitment. They were taking off the box, it was very performative. Because if that's part of the DNA of your culture and your organization, then you would not be scaling this back. So that's one. There's different ways to kind of talk about that. I mean, there's companies like Walmart and others and Ford that did all of that. The other part is, I think, underpinning the concerns related to DEI, and again, is when I do the work that I do, and I do a lot of work in this space, is really thinking about, well, what's causing this fear of it? And for me, there's a lot of inequities, and what we want to really do is actually close the gap around the inequities. So I think it's actually very important for companies. In addition to that, if companies are local, and you want to go global, you cannot do that if your workforce does not reflect the future of, your strategy to go global. I mean, you need those different perspectives. And in fact, I mean, I don't need, many of you I'm sure know, there's a ton of data that says companies that are actually very diverse outperform companies that are very homogeneous. And I would also say, I don't actually call it DEI. I do a lot of training in this area. I call it innovation. You cannot innovate as an organization, and you cannot be called innovative if your workforce is homogeneous. And so when you have different perspectives, different lived experiences that come to the table that give you a solution that's a bit different, then I think that's what DEI is. I mean, it's everybody else's different way of thinking and all of that being brought to the table. In terms of skill set, just one final lens to that, is when I think about this skill set, what we're looking for, I'm a very big fan of looking at growth mindset. And what I mean about that is people who come in, you could have all of the different, degrees and so forth, but we want people who can actually rethink a problem differently, think outside the box a little bit, have that growth mindset of looking at a problem saying, I see innovation rather than challenges. That, I think, is where we need to be thinking when we talk about DEI and the innovation ecosystem.
Thank you for sharing that. That's really insightful. And really doubling down on that a little bit, when we look at Canadian technology companies scaling on international lands, let's go to you, Kosta. You bootstrapped a company. You not only scaled it, but you had a successful exit. So from the get-go, from a talent acquisition standpoint, were you looking at cross-border or global hiring strategies? And was that any different from hiring local talent? And how did you navigate that?
Yeah, so let me preface this to say that I come from a lens of a bootstrapped founder. What does that mean? That means I've never received any check from an investor. And by the way, I know there's a lot of investors here. Jude, I've met a few. My door is open. I wouldn't mind using someone else's money for a change, but I've never raised any debt, never got any money from friends or family. All my businesses were always funded by either my own savings or revenue from real clients. So that's my lens. Now, I think that the main objective of every founder, startup CEO, founder, is two things. One, to provide as much value as humanly possible to your clients, and while two, doing that in the most efficient way possible. Okay, so now the beautiful thing about business and entrepreneurship is that how you execute on those things is widely subjective, right? So I bet I can ask any founder in this room what their strategy would be, and you're going to hear different things. You might overlap, but everyone's going to have a unique strategy, which is great. Now, coming to your question, Sneha, about like workforce strategy, truthfully and honestly, I never had a workforce strategy per se. So at my previous company, at our peak, we had about 30 employees or team members across 14 countries around the world. So really, it doesn't get much more diverse than that, you can say. And so although I didn't have this workforce strategy, when you're in a remote setup, you're almost like 100% likely to have a very diverse workforce, which has proven to create a lot of benefits for me and my company, for sure.
Appreciate all the practical insights you shared. And Jude, when we look at from an investor's perspective, because you look at deals all the time at Graphite, now what are some of the challenges that local companies face when they are hiring internationally? Do they have a specific approach in mind when they're scaling to global markets, or something that they should consider as well?
I think when like Graphite invests early, like we invest at the seed stage, so a lot of times it's like 500K in revenue and above. And when we look at these companies, if they're not able to expand globally, and a lot of it in the past usually meant the States, and that's ever evolving right now, it meant that they had to build mostly sales type talent there, like BD talent. And sales is really important because in terms of sales, like when you look at Canada and America, they're kind of culturally similar. But when you start looking at other parts of the globe, like other parts in Europe and et cetera, the culture is a little different. So you need to hire locally that understands that and is able to get those first 10 sales in that region. And to hire that is actually quite difficult. I think we work with a lot of our partners to help when we hire externally. Artemis, I feel like, is somewhere here. We use them. And, you know, we look for people that have that expertise to hire locally. The other part I want to touch on is like a lot of our early hires are all done locally, and in Canada we have such a diverse talent pool. I don't know if anyone saw this Socratica event last week or the week before, I can't remember, but there was 4,500 students that are all like pitching ideas, and it was such a diverse crowd and such ambitious kids that are like probably going to do great things. And you know, when you layer like this whole situation we have going on, I think Canada's in a good, unique, competitive advantage in terms of like being very capital efficient. And Graphite Ventures invest in very capital efficient companies. And what you're seeing with AI is like the barrier to entry in entrepreneurship is going down. You can be so much more capital efficient. But at the same time, Canada still has a really good workforce. Like I spoke to the former CTO of IBM, and he actually ranked like University of Waterloo as the top university to source like computer science grads, et cetera, from. So if I had to hire someone in Canada at a fraction of the salary with the foreign exchange and our non-dilutives, you're going to get like a 6-month extension in runway. So when you're facing an American company or a European or whoever it is locally in their region, you should have a cash efficiency compared to them. So what we want to see is hire locally for almost everything other than sales. That's the only thing you're hiring outside.
That's really interesting. Let's look inwards now, and let's look at Canada, right? So some of the key statistics for especially Mississauga as part of the city, we see numbers all the time, and what we've noticed is out of the Fortune 500 companies, 77 companies call Mississauga their home, and it's international talent, international companies that are growing locally. So my next question is for you, Dr. Georgette. And how do Canadian cities like Toronto, Mississauga, even Waterloo, Vancouver, and Montreal really become the epicenter of emerging global tech hubs? And how can these cities position themselves to not only attract talent, but retain the talent as well?
So first of all, I'm going to say I'm a proud resident of Mississauga. You know, one of the things that I think about, and I actually had this conversation with someone from another region that came to my end, and we were talking a little bit about the talent and the ability. So I have this theme in what I believe to be what I call collaboration over competition. And it's very hard when we're all competing for resources or talent or ideas and you're all startups. But the reality was having this conversation with this person, it was, oh, you know, we'd love to do this, but it's too bad you're not in this part because you're in Mississauga. And I looked at him and I said, yeah, but do you realize how many of our employees actually probably live in your area? So your economy is benefiting, and rather than sort of thinking, well, these are where the boundaries, can we think of it differently? And so I was sort of saying to him, I wonder whether we should be considering, like, or have you thought about working like a hub and spoke model, or what I call the rays of sunshine, or whatever you want to call it. But the idea is that I do think we need to think and double down more on collaboration, and how we identify that and how we live it. And I'm going to give you an example. So I'm the chief of staff at Myant. Myant is this incredible company, advanced manufacturing, but we also have a whole division in healthcare with smart textiles, but something like you've never seen before. So I'm very proud of the work that we do, but also what we do is we have 1,400 patents. We have over 200 scientists and engineers that work with us. We have actually, we do use this collaboration model in the sense that we partner with universities, we partner with government, we partner with other companies to say, how can we level up and accelerate what it is we're trying to do so we can go there faster and better rather than doing it alone, as the African proverb says. So what we also have done is said, and this is very unique, I'm going to say, I think, so our CEO, Tony Shaheen, has said, if someone wants to come and work with us at Myant, and you're Canadian, and you're going to manufacture in Canada, we're going to give you access to some of our IP for free. Just come work with us, and we'll do that because he really does believe we should be an economy. We can drive it. It should be Canadian-made. And I feel right now we're at a really critical point, given everything that's happening in the world and south of the border, that we should be, elbows up, Canada strong. And, we welcome that. And I'm going to tell you, it has worked because we have had startups in our space that have actually leveraged our facility to get greater funding and I'm going to say graduate out of Myant for that. So I really do think that's the model, and it's a model that can happen across Canada. We don't have to be, locally based or provincially based. There's different ways that we can work it. It's just rethinking how we're defining collaboration.
Thank you. And the key aspect you highlighted is collaboration, right?
Collaboration over competition.
Collaboration over competition. Love that. And Kosta, you mentioned that you didn't have really a strategy in place intentionally to go global with your recruitment strategies, but since you were a remote company, that was inevitable. Now, what was the biggest advantage of hiring globally, and how did you maintain a strong culture that created a collaborative environment in your organization?
Yeah, so I've been running remote companies now for over 11 years. This was way before COVID, way before remote work was even a thing, right? I remember at the time you started seeing like blog articles of Buffer, Basecamp, Chargeify, talking about remote. So it was very early on. So my company, our DNA is remote. Our processes, systems, infrastructure, how we hire, how we onboard, everything is built around remote. It's in our DNA. So it's also funny when I speak to people about remote work and running a remote company, the one advantage that everyone thinks is the economic benefits and cost savings, which in some sense is true, but couldn't be further from the truth in terms of what the real advantage is. And so by far the biggest advantage of being a remote company is just being able to tap into a global marketplace of talent. I can't tell you to this day how amazed I am at just the amount of talent globally. I've spoken to people from all walks of life and the smallest of communities and villages to countries I haven't even heard of. And it literally feels like a black hole of infinite talent that you have access to. And I always often describe it as like a hiring hack that I have access to, which is incredible. So that's by far the biggest advantage. And to your point about culture, this is probably a deeper topic, and we can go on a long time about this, but I think at the core of it, culture is comprised of people. And so I have a pretty lengthy process in terms of how I hire remote, but at the core of it, if you can attract people that are as closely aligned as possible with your values, beliefs, and principles, you will naturally create a unified culture.
Awesome. And then coming to Jude, from Graphite Ventures, early stage investments, I'm pretty sure there is a technical requirement to fit the mandate of the fund, right? So the checks and balances. But beyond that, an early stage investor does invest in the people, right? So when you look at potential leads or that become deals and those teams, what is right from the get-go the culture that you look at, or are there any inclusion strategies that those teams embed from an early on that set them up for success for global scalability?
Yeah, I think like when you're looking at investing at the early stage, especially now, like defensibility and moats are coming down. It's a lot about team and execution and everything around that. And we help a lot of our founders even recruit and et cetera. But if you get a recruit wrong and they come into the team and it's not a cultural fit, that could be disastrous for your team. And like we do like our founders to think of their strategy around making sure that they're creating an inclusive environment. And we do invest in we notice that our investments in diverse teams tend to outperform and do really well in terms of results. And it comes back to like, maybe it's resilience, grit, et cetera. But I think it also comes back to this cultural perspective of different perspectives. Like me growing up versus Kosta versus Georgette, we're all growing up in different circumstances, and that appeals to different markets, and we're able to sell into different markets potentially. And that also goes to like the European and et cetera fit. But in terms of like when we look at that, we're very thesis driven, and we notice that even when we're very thesis driven, our investments end up being in diverse teams and diverse founding teams and diverse groups of people. And we're also starting to see a trend of that being accelerated. So I deal with a lot of like the top of funnel stuff where we see a lot of the deal flow coming through. And even that is just, we're starting to see way more diversity from the top. So that's good to see.
It's very interesting to hear that they accelerate if they have diverse teams that they've built. And now we've gone through what we've been doing and what we did in the past. Let's deep dive a little bit into the future of hiring strategies and the future of technology recruitment. So I'm going to open it up to all of you. And as we look forward, what are some of the key things the audience can take back home into refining their talent acquisition strategies that can really not set them up for Canadian success, but also look at putting Canada on the map more so than even now, and prepare them for successful exits potentially as well. So I'm going to open it up to all of you.
You guys are looking at me, so yeah, I'll kick it off. I'm going to take this question with just a practical perspective, right? So to me, one of the most important skill sets that any founder should have is sales. Like, people don't look at sales as a skill, but it is. It's a skill just like anything else. You can get better with time and experience. But when you say sales, you often think like picking up the phone and selling your product or service, which is a component of sales. But the way I look at it as a founder, sales comes with you like from day one to that potential exit. So what do I mean by that is when you're hiring, right? So it's salesmanship. People often get it backwards, where you think the candidate you're hiring or interviewing is the one selling you. But in reality, I'm doing more selling to that person than they are to me. And why is that? Because they don't know me or my company from a hole in the wall. So I have to be almost like a salesman to, not in a sleazy way, but in a way just to communicate my vision, what we're doing as a company, have them buy into me and what we're doing, and have them take the leap and join me on the mission, right? So that it's a form of salesmanship. Like, that's how I look at it. Beyond that, now you've built a team. It also requires a form of salesmanship to keep your team motivated and inspired and continuing to buy into that vision. So I look at this as a form of salesmanship. So coming back to it's a skill that you should improve upon and get better with time and experience. So sales and communication, I think these are two very practical skill sets that are absolutely required to grow a successful company in a promising workforce.
Absolutely.
And I was just going to add to that. So just a few things to think about in terms of how our world is changing. And I just wanted to give folks some data points. So 75% of the global workforce are millennials. And so they function a little differently than other groups. 66% of that group works full-time. 57% are satisfied with their pay, so almost half are not satisfied with what they're getting paid. 29% are engaged with their work, so just notice how the numbers are dropping. 21% change jobs within a year. So we're talking a little bit about retention, but underpinning that is actually engagement. And so the lack of employee engagement, according to a recent article in Forbes and a recent Gallup poll, 8.8 trillion is the actual cost to companies with respect to low engagement. And so it's really important for us to be thinking about what that means. So underpinning engagement is also inclusion, right? Do you feel included? Do you see yourself in the company? Do you see yourself growing? And so forth. I wrote an article a few years ago at Forbes, and I talked about what I call the 5 Ps. So most companies focus on people, you have purpose, sometimes you have like a whole thing on planet, you might be your DEI, but at the end of the day, it's profit and your ability to pivot. If you cannot do all of those 5 things, you are not going to survive as an organization and grow and scale. And so part of that is your talent. People are what drives it. I know we talk about AI, but you still need people to get things done. So hiring the right people, thinking about your company, thinking about the values, and the things that underpin engagement are going to actually transform your company. The higher engagement, the higher the ROI and the returns on your bottom line. And so that goes back to some of the things that Kosta touched on and some of the things that Jude touched on. But I think sometimes it gets lost in the mix that we think engagement is separate from inclusion, but they're actually tied together.
Very insightful. Jude, did you have any closing comments and remarks on this?
No, I think as long as you find people that are mission driven with the same thought, with a founding team, I think needs to think, each and every one of them need to think like a founder. I think the founding team, even if you're the CTO or a technical founder, if you're out and about, you should be selling your company. And I think that's what you need to look for in all your talent and see that you guys all align across that mission.
Amazing. Thank you so much for all the practical insights. I hope all the audience members and founders can take away some of these key aspects and build bigger, better teams and put Canada on the map with your tech. Thank you so much.